I read a lot of permaculture books. I study a lot of the techniques, but a lot of it is just kind of interacting with the land and seeing what makes sense, right? It's not magic. I have my garden kind of. I'm up on a hill. I go right down the hill into the bottom land. Right at the bottom is like my garden, and the garden is pretty big because that's what I've been mostly focused on, like 2,500 square feet right now. And it's near the chicken coop, and so that makes sense in terms of like compost and the compost in the chicken area.
This is the Farm Hop Life Podcast, a traveling homestead family. I'm Matt Derosier. Tonight I have a special guest, Dr. Jason Snyder. He has a bachelor in economics, master's in geography, PhD in agricultural food and resource economics. He's a professor at Appalachian State University in North Carolina. On Twitter, he's known as Cognizor. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Doomer Optimist podcast host, and a homesteader.
Yeah,
that's a lot of things.
More or less. Yeah. I'm an adjunct professor right now. I'm trying to get upgraded. But and I'm a baby homesteader. I'm in my third year, so kind of learning as I go.
Sure.
We'll have a lot to learn.
Don't we all, right? I mean, even like a whole lifetime, you could just be learning, right? And hopefully,
It really is a lifetime endeavor. I mean, I had this tweet a while back of like, you don't have infinite optionality, but if you kind of attach yourself to a kind of an evolutionary process, it produces infinite novelty. And I think homesteading and community building is something like that. You're committing yourself, grafting yourself into an evolutionary process. And there's always going to be new things to respond to. There's always going to be new situations, new skills that you have to learn or pick up. It never ends. And so I don't think you can get bored if you're doing it right.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Yeah. So how did you get started homesteading then? As you take a sip of coffee. Perfect timing.
I was finishing up my PhD, was doing a postdoc. I actually moved to the mountains in North Carolina following my wife. My wife got a tenure track position in this department. And I think I was pretty disillusioned with my research, with my degree program, with the whole paradigm that economics, applied economics, kind of revolves around. I was basically being trained to be a technocrat. A lot of my work was somewhat interesting. It was mainly focused in East Africa, looking at like food systems and agriculture related issues. But I just started becoming more and more unsatisfied with the work, not enjoying being kind of just a data guy, collecting data and not really kind of believing the kinds of results we were getting based on the kind of data we were collecting. And so I started becoming disillusioned with that. I got kind of involved with this program here, which is, focused on kind of sustainable development, really focused on kind of like local food systems. And that's something that I've been interested in much earlier in my life. But then I kind of, went to be like a academic and, technocrat. And I kind of came back around to that. And then there was just a number of influences. Various people influenced me where I decided, I think that my life would be much more meaningful. I would feel more embodied and things would be more wholesome if I moved towards more self-production, more self-resilience. And so then we found a place with some land, picked up some books on permaculture, and away we went.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you said you did work in East Africa. So you were on the ground then over there, or?
Yeah, for a while. I mean, that's I spent several months in Tanzania for my postdoc. I spent time in Zambia, basically like collecting data, like doing surveys and stuff like that. And it was the intentions I feel like were good. It's like, how do we, improve food security for, the populations over there. But their whole paradigm was kind of like, let's make the rest of the developing world more like the West in terms of like the industrial ag model. And so, somewhat cheering kind of the influx of like supermarkets and foreign direct investment and while also saying there are some issues with that, let's clean it up. But basically, in general, implicitly favoring, the model that the United States and other parts of the world have gone down for several decades now, at least since World War II. And when I started taking issues around ecology and climate and soil and biodiversity seriously, then and when I decided to really, what would it look like to kind of, put those front and center in terms of not just on the sideline, like, oh, that's a compartmentalized issue, somebody will figure that out, whatever. But like, we need to like increase productivity, get farmers to be more productive. That usually means larger tracts of land, less farmers, fertilizers, all the whole thing. If we were to take kind of the fact that we're just decimating the planet seriously, what would that imply for everything? And that kind of slowly restructured my thinking, and themes of like bioregionalism and localism started just popping up in my consciousness.
Sure.
It started to become very influential for me, and so I just kind of slowly, and then at some point a couple of years ago, quickly when we got the land, started moving in this direction. So I'm pretty new to this whole scene, really. Like I'm kind of a new.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
But you got the idea of localism from, doing surveys and seeing the stuff in East Africa there?
Not directly. I think one thought that started to arise is, what do us, outsiders coming in, just kind of collecting, taking surveys, collecting data, crunching numbers, coming up with policy recommendations. Like, what do we really know about, the complexity of the culture and the food system and the daily life? As I started reading like systems-related literature, complexity-related literature, I started concluding that, not very much. That the technocratic approach is very arrogant. It's very condescending. And so I just started like, I'd like be running, regression analysis and things with data that I wasn't sure really represented reality, and getting results that are like, I don't know if this is real, and it just became kind of disillusioned. So once my postdoc ended, I was just like, okay, enough of that. Like I'm changing direction. And so I'm still in the process of like pivoting, my life and figuring out, my livelihood along the way.
That's fair. Yeah. You also had mentioned influences. What kind of influences? So
I've been on Twitter. I mean, Twitter has been, a lot of people have influenced me through Twitter.
Sure.
I think for a while I got really interested in this whole movement called metamodernism. Then I started getting interested in kind of like bioregionalism, and there's some modern day bioregionalists that were influential, were like Joe Brewer and Benedict Christian Wall and people like that. And then localism, people like Joe Norman, he was very influential for me. I started reading like Wendell Berry, and just, various kind of place-based texts, right? I started when I got here, got this place, I started reading about the history of this region, started reading like Foxfire series, and so there was just, it's hard to like trace a linear path of like influences.
Right.
It's just so many things that kind of weave together, a sensibility at any given time, take you down a trajectory. A lot of permaculture related literature is really influential. I mean, just, the mindset that induces to think in terms of like, site design in a holistic manner, I think it's kind of psychoactive in a way. Like it's just kind of, it starts kind of bleeding out into all aspects of your life, and the implications of that. So yeah, a lot of influences. I mean, a lot of people have influenced me along the way. I used to have another podcast called Both And, or I co-hosted, and people can, if they want to kind of see my intellectual evolution, they can check that out. But we started interviewing people from kind of all over the map, all kinds of people from all over the ideological spectrum, and there's kind of really high level conversations, like abstract, but over time I started just wanting to get more concrete, right? And like, okay, but like, how do we implement these interesting ideas, and homesteading is like this is kind of grounded as it gets, right? Either your plants grow or they don't, either your stuff works or it doesn't, and so that was really attractive, and it's definitely, I think, very strongly the trajectory I'm on, and I will be on. Yeah.
What was the name of that podcast for anyone that wanted to look it up?
Both And.
Both And. Okay.
Yeah, both slash and. But if you just type in Both And podcast, you'll find it.
All right.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity for anyone who was like, what was that? Mm-hmm. You had mentioned a couple things back there. Metamodern. Modernism. What can you explain what that is?
It's a whole rabbit hole. Okay, this is
perfect.
He's
hi.
We're having a podcast right now. Well, he might be around, so I might be a little bit distracted.
Can he explain it to me?
It's a whole rabbit hole that I don't know if we want to go down. It's an aesthetic, cultural, intellectual movement that wants to move basically, or sees society. There's different strands. Some are more prescriptive and some are more descriptive, but sees kind of society moving beyond postmodernism, or needing to move on beyond postmodernism. It's some strands of it are partially influenced by integral, like you're familiar with like Ken Wilber's stuff. Some parts of it are influenced by complexity thinking, or like cultural stage theory, like different kind of structures of consciousness that people go throughout history. And so it's kind of, again, it's this whole, there's different strands, and but it's kind of the more prescriptive strand, kind of, sees, society going through like modernism of like, moving beyond kind of traditional ways of life, and like, science and technology and kind of utopian visions, and then postmodernism kind of deconstructs all of that, right? And it starts on the left. I would say it's now very much on the right as well. Like we're living in a postmodern cultural context, but still with modern infrastructure, and it's just not working. None of it's working.
Right.
It's just, everything's dysfunctional right now. I think a lot of people would agree. And so we need to move beyond that. We need to, like, we've kind of understood the problems. We can nitpick the problems with modernity all day long, but at some point we need to start crafting a positive vision again for society, a constructive vision that's not as naive as modernism, and also takes into account and integrates the wisdom from kind of like indigenous consciousness, traditional ways of life, not throwing out modernity altogether, taking it that we still like, and also coming with a critical, skeptical view that is more characteristic of postmodernism, and trying to integrate it all together into kind of a positive, constructive vision moving forward. I think that's probably my nutshell version. And so, that was very abstract, but then I started getting really interested in localism, and I call myself a metamodern localist because it's kind of like two intellectual influences kind of I'm fusing together, right? And I very much see like doomer optimism. For me personally, everyone has different takes on what that term means. It's just a meme, right? But for me, it's a very metamodern kind of sensibility of like, yeah, we've going through the doom. We recognize the doom. That's the deconstructive element. But let's move forward with hope, with pragmatic hope, not naive optimism, but with like grounded, real, like, what is actually real, right? And how can we use that as a basis moving forward? And so that's kind of how I interpret, so it's kind of like in a cultural stage theory model, like that's where we are in society, I guess.
Yeah. I listened to quite a few of the Doomer Optimist podcasts, and
Yeah.
I can't remember which episode it was, but you had mentioned that you're more doomer than optimist.
It depends on the day.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Depends on the day. I think our ecological situation is very dire, and think of, when I say ecological situation, think of like life support systems. For human economic cultural life on this planet, right? Like we're systematically undermining the very base of that foundation of the pyramid that makes that possible. And so as well as like our energy future, I think that we're going to be running out of fossil fuels at some points. There's debates on whether we're at peak oil or not or whatever. But I'm also concerned about increasing instability of the climate situation, and I just think that our current civilization as it stands is not long for this world, and I think that there is going to be a lot of collateral damage. And we don't, as much as we want to prepare for become resilient, we're all subject to the contingencies of history, right? None of us, I don't know who's going to make it out alive, right? So there's part of me that sees things as very dire. But at the same time, I reject fatalism. I reject nihilism, fatalism, depression based on, being like a, environmental doomer or something. I just don't think that's a good way to live. It's not healthy, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, for me, it's like I'm moving forward as if there's hope for real human thriving in the future. I don't know where it's going to be, how many of us are going to be involved with that, but I think it is possible, and I want to work toward that vision.
So is that what, like, part of that motivates you to grow your own food then as a homesteader?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's this whole debate of like, what should be your primary motivation? Like, if you ask some people, they'll say, well, it should really just be based on you're attracted to wholesomeness, right? And it shouldn't be based on kind of this almost like utilitarian calculation where I'm doing it because of the global situation and I actually hate it, but I'm just doing it and trudging. But to be honest, I think more of kind of my diagnosis of history and the planet and where we are as a species led me in this direction. But I have to say now that I really enjoy it. Right, it's the most fulfilling. Like gardening, being outside, working on projects is the most fulfilling. Like physical projects is the most fulfilling parts of my day. Besides like being with my family and my kid and stuff. And I just really enjoy it. Right, I would do this stuff now, even if it was just a complete lifestyle project. Right, like it had no bearing on the future of humanity. I would still do it because I just enjoy it so much. And I think that's key for it to be sustainable. Just to be able to do it, right? Like you have to love it.
Yeah.
It has to be something. It has to be, and I think it is. I think it there was, I think, parts of me before that were disembodied, desituated. I was like traveling all over the world. I was, that was kind of my, I had this, admittedly, I had kind of a millennial ideology. And I definitely felt very kind of discombobulated, compartmentalized. I got really heavy into meditation for a while. I used to be very religious. There's a whole background with like religion and spirituality, but to actually put down roots, plan to stay here, wanting to build a multi-generational project, has been incredibly fulfilling. And so I would do it, even if the Elon Musk of the world, solve our energy issues and, move half the planet to Mars. And so we have plenty of, our ecological problems go away. I would still want to do this because it's
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
You had mentioned, you gotta love to do it, right?
Yeah.
And it made me think that if more people actually knew what it took to grow a tomato, they would appreciate every tomato they
Yeah.
ever ate forever, even if they never grew another one ever again. Like, wow, they're just working so hard to eat this, grow this tomato, and it's just so we can eat it. I think they'd have a whole new appreciation for food, and that it's just a quick thought I had.
Yeah, no, it really does. I mean, when you're actually going through the whole process of planting a seed, or raising an animal, right, or planting a tree, one thing, for one, it's a kind of a form of nervous system regulation, right, where it's not instant gratification, right, and it's not something where you can kind of slack off and then put in a heroic effort and it'll be okay, right? It's not like how it was
Right.
for me going through grad school and stuff, where like I could just procrastinate and then put in a heroic effort and be fine. No, it requires constant vigilance, but also patience, right? And I think these two things are very important for a person's character, right?
Yes.
And especially with planting trees, low time preference, right? Even, everyone knows the saying of like, the old man planting a tree that he knows he'll never live in, but he knows what his grandkids will enjoy. That's really, I think, the basis of having a strong character. It instills character into you, or else, I mean, in order to be successful, you have to build character, right? It's almost required.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So then, following up there, so you've only been on your property for 3 years, I think you said?
I mean, we're in our third year. Yeah.
So your third year?
We came in March of 2020, right? We bought this place right before the pandemic. We moved in right when people were starting to freak out.
Couldn't ask for a better time.
Yeah, no, timing was great. I mean, we couldn't have afforded this place if we were trying to buy it now, and that's the real tragedy of the situation. Is the interest in things like homesteading has gone up so much in the last couple of years, and it's just so out of reach for so many people, and there's a whole bunch of political economy reasons for that, but it's kind of tragic, and so I feel incredibly lucky, incredibly blessed to be in the situation I'm in.
Yeah. So I'm assuming what you mean there, that it's out of reach for a lot of people, that they can't even get their 1/10 of an acre to have one raised garden bed in their front yard. I'm assuming that's what you mean, that they can't get out of their apartment.
Well, so I mean, what we try and emphasize in doing our optimism world is make maximum use of whatever leverage, whatever affordance you have, right? So if you're in an apartment, grow tomatoes on the deck, right? If you have 1/10 of an acre, you can definitely put in some garden beds, things like that. If you're in certain areas, you can have chickens, even if you're in like a suburb. Of course, you have to worry about HOAs and all that bullshit. But yeah, and so I think kind of our motto is like, don't make excuses, right? Like maximize every opportunity you can. At the same time, my kind of macro structural lens, I notice that a lot of the land is being bought up by private asset managers, right? Like BlackRock and other organizations. A lot of boomers are buying up land. They're kind of retirement homes in the country.
Right.
Land, prices of land and housing has shot up in the last couple of years. And I think that there's only so much that, as an individual, I say, do everything you can with what you have. But from my societal lens, I say, okay, something pretty fundamental is going to need to change in order to, if there is the demand, if people are ready, if people have been building up their skills and are not going to squander them, then, we need to figure out how to get more people, the opportunity to raise, grow food, to develop homesteads, develop, villages, to develop ways of life that are within reach. You don't have to be rich to do it.
Sure. um, going back to your place specifically,
Yeah.
do you have a you said that you're like just getting into permaculture and stuff.
Mhm.
Do you have a plan for your property? Like, have you sketched it out, like your zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Any methods, practices, or
Yeah.
techniques that you're trying to implement on your place?
Sort of. When I first got here, there's a guy in our county extension who's kind of a permaculture guy. I had him come
Oh,
out
cool.
and give me some advice. And much of his advice was already kind of what I was already thinking. So I have a lot of kind of like bottomland. I'm in a valley, in the mountains, and I have a lot of nice bottomland, flat. And so it's just obvious that I need to get some grazing animals there, some ruminants. So far we have chickens. I haven't made the leap to get. I probably want to get sheep. What's that? She's upstairs. Go talk to her. Okay. Yeah, she should be quiet. So I probably want to get some sheep, and I want to probably do some rotational grazing, right? Holistic grazing. So that's just kind of very obvious, just based on the lay of the land.
Sure.
And then I want to plant a lot of trees. It just seems obvious, and I want to eventually move towards silvopasture. That just seems obvious to me. So I'm starting by I have a little kind of orchard right near the house, but then I'm planting like trees along the edge of the property, mostly fruit and nut trees. And I'm trying to, I'm thinking eventually like food forest type situation. And so I'm thinking about where I'm planting them with relation to water and, sunlight. And then I noticed that part of my property it's kind of like a wetland area, and water was kind of building up in a certain area. So I was like, oh, I'm going to put a pond there. I started, it was a couple of winters ago, I was just getting kind of antsy and bored. And so I just started hand digging it, with the shovel, like every day, like an hour for like a month or two. And I dug a pretty big pond, but only like a foot deep, and it was full of water. And then last summer, it dried out. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to need to bring an excavator at some point to make this a proper pond. But it's just obvious that that's where it goes. And once I get a pond in, then I can plant like, willow trees around, and I could get some fish, maybe some bass, fish to farm.
Yeah.
Then I could think about getting ducks, for example, because they'll have a pond. And so, so everything, so I read a lot of permaculture books. I study a lot of the techniques, but, a lot of it is just kind of interacting with the land and seeing what makes sense, right? It's not magic. I have my garden I'm up on a hill. I go right down the hill into the bottom land. Right at the bottom is like my garden, and the garden is pretty big because that's what I've been mostly focused on, like 2,500 square feet right now. And it's near the chicken coop, and so that makes sense in terms of like compost and the compost in the chicken area. It's for me. It's I haven't really done a detailed plan, something like that, just because I'm kind of just like it's like 1 month at a time, right? Like, okay, like what makes sense to do now?
Sure.
This year, we have another kid coming in late July, so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to.
Congrats.
Yeah. My son, he calls her Flower Girl. That's his name for her. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to get sheep this year, just because it's too much. So I'm also just kind of like trying to pace myself, not take on too much at one time. And so I don't know if that answers your question. I'm always thinking about
perfect.
Improve. So like last year, I was just kind of putting, the first year I was kind of putting seeds in the ground. I didn't really have a methodology. And then last year I was like, okay, I'm going to try and switch to no-till, right? That just seems to make sense. I want to improve the soil. And so I brought a lot of the soil from the pond to make raised beds, because we also had flooding last year, which we get occasionally, which kind of washed away a lot of the topsoil, which was really bad, right? And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to make some raised beds to help prevent that, because I noticed that the raised beds I had, just a few, the water went around them. So I'm like, okay, great, that makes sense. And then I'm like, okay, well, I should probably put some swales where I expect it to flood from this little ditch when it rains a whole bunch. I'm like, okay, like I'll put some swales there. So a lot of it is like interacting with the land, seeing what makes sense. And then of course, I'm always like watching YouTube videos and reading, things and seeing what people are doing on Twitter and online and stuff like that to get inspiration as well.
No, that was a perfect answer. I love that. So what have you tried that's worked well so far? Like specific breed of chicken, that's hardy for your area, or, it's just easy to keep, or it's broody if that's what you're looking for, or specific nut, fruit trees, things like that.
Yeah, well, chickens are great, and they're really easy. We built a coop like a year and a half ago. We had our first coop and a weasel broke in, and fatally injured like 3 of them. So okay, we need to have a better one. So we did that, and we were still losing a lot of chickens to predators. We were kind of like letting them go free range. We probably lost over a dozen chickens to predators, and so we're like, okay, well, I need to build a fenced area, right, and a net on top. So we're losing to hawks, bobcats, weasel. I think it's a weasel that got those first 3. But so now that I think we have a good setup for the chickens, and it's just great, right? As much eggs as we can eat, just a great source of protein, fat and stuff. We put in a lot of trees. They're still really young, and so it remains to be seen how they'll do. I put in tons of chestnut trees. Not people always ask what kind. Not American. These are just stuff we got locally from Extension. Probably Chinese chestnut. Like to get some American hybrids at some point. We put in a lot of a bunch of apple trees, pear trees, mulberry, hazelnut, plum. A bunch of various berry bushes, but they're still all just kind of in their first couple years, right? And we're putting in more each year. And so we haven't really gotten a harvest yet. I think I've gotten like 1 pear so far as a harvest, and like a couple of blueberries. So it's hard to say what's worked there. In terms of gardening, I have high hopes this year, just because I think we have a better setup. I'm being much more careful about the soil. And things. Last year we had, some crops that did really well, some crops that didn't do well, right? Our garlic was just kicking ass. I think that's like our best crop so far is garlic.
Keep the vampires away.
Yeah, it keeps the vampires away. Various crops have done well, like chard and kale have done really well. Squash has done really well. We haven't really figured it out, cracked the code with like corn yet, and our bean crop hasn't been the best. And so it's been hit or miss. Our potato crop was okay last year, and so all of these things are like plus or minus. And so I'd say with the garden it's been mixed, but I have high hopes for this year that it's going to be a lot better, just because I've done a lot more reading up on kind of proper soil management. Things like that. So I think I have a much better. I'm coming in with a lot more knowledge now of how to do it right. So I have high hopes. Yeah. So yeah, that's where we are. And then of course, in terms of like physical infrastructure, I mentioned like the chicken coop. We've been really happy with that. My wife's father helped us design it. That was really helpful and helped us get started. We're building a tree house. Slowly but surely. That's fun. Nothing. We bought this house as is. We haven't had any major problems with it yet, but I'm slowly wanting to build up skills. I grew up thinking very abstract thoughts, right? Very philosophical and very kind of data analysis and computer oriented. And again, the millennial ideology. Just kept going to school because I thought that's the thing that you did. And so I feel like I need to build up a lot of like manual skills fast. And so, I'm trying to do that, to engage with that, when the issue arises. So yeah, so it's been mixed, but I feel like I'm learning a lot, and I'm definitely optimistic.
What kind of manual skills are you working on?
So far it's just been like building small things, right? Like The chicken coop was, a big one for me. Things like, the tree house now is interesting. What else? Just like small things, like just like taking like scrap wood and like building like little tables and chairs and,
There's nothing wrong with that.
yeah, like very simple stuff, right? So just learning how to like, starting to accumulate tools, knowing how they work, knowing what they're used for, just figuring out, how to take lumber and make something with it. So that's been the major thing. Eventually I want to get more into like plumbing and, electrical. I have a long way to go there. Yeah. But
When something breaks on your house, you'll definitely figure out.
You have the opportunity to do it, right?
Yeah, unless it's like immediate, like, oh no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, just don't use that toilet. We got another one.
Right. Exactly.
So far, what's been the biggest challenge in homesteading that you faced?
Biggest challenge. Time management is one of just like staying organized. There's always a tension between like keeping the inside of your house clean and organized, especially with kid, and working on outdoor projects. So there's always kind of a tension there. Unexpected events, flooding, mini droughts. So figuring out, just not really understanding the hydrology, like the actual practical hydrology of the land, right? And each season is different, right? And so I haven't been, if I had been here for like 20 years, maybe I'd have a better sense of the rhythm, right?
Right.
So like the first year it was like flooding in a certain area, so I built these swales, and then it just hasn't flooded there at all. Like no water has come there, and I'm just like, okay, well, whatever. No major challenges. Part of it is like I'm taking it slowly. Like I'm not trying to, it's like right now it's not urgent. It's more of just something to slowly pursue. I'm not needing to rely on it for, to feed myself. I'm trying to increase the amount of food that we produce for ourselves to become more self-sufficient. But, so it's, the fact that we both have jobs, we have incomes, it's a luxurious place to be where, it's so more it's like, how can I improve the process? It's not like, oh my God, if we don't get these systems right, we're going to starve. Right. And, situation might change in the future. Right. And so, I expect things to get much more difficult, right? Economically, with weather patterns and everything else. I expect supply chains just more and more to break down. That's my doomer part of me coming out. And so, part of me is like, I'm glad that I have the luxury of like, this is more of just kind of like a hobby at this point, but it's a serious hobby, right? It's a serious hobby where like, I have in the back of my mind, okay, like I need to improve these systems for, whatever's coming down the line.
Absolutely. You had mentioned you had put in a swale and it like wasn't in the right spot. It kind of sounded like I intentionally skipped over a question because you had already mentioned a couple of learning moments.
Yeah.
So what's something that you have tried other than putting in a swale in the wrong spot, or hand digging a pond, or water going around raised beds, things like that?
Going over most of the garden and going around just the very few raised beds we got at the time. Yeah.
Is there anything else that comes to mind of like, I should have done that different?
The first year tree planting. So I've been planting like every April because we get it from Extension, and that's when they sell the trees. We get most of the trees from there. And the placement of the trees probably wasn't optimal in a certain area for like sunlight capture, where like you have the largest trees kind of in the north part of, relatively north, and the smaller trees relatively south. You can maximize, so I put like some hazelnuts like behind like some like north of like some apples and some persimmons, and now I'm just like, that was stupid, right? So that's it's not a big deal, just because for the most part I like the placement of things. Yeah. What else? I mean, I didn't really protect the soil the first year, right? Like I just didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. And I didn't like mulch the soil around. I had a lot of bare soil. I didn't really like amend it with like compost or mulch, afterwards. And so the second year, like certain parts, especially where it flooded and a lot of topsoil got washed off, we're seemed to be much lower productivity because of that. And so that was just kind of like, beginner's mistake. And so, so I feel like because I brought in new soil to make these raised beds, I kind of can start over because the soil is pretty rich, especially the first time you plant into it. And I'm like, okay, like I'm getting kind of like a restart, a freebie, but I'm not going to make that mistake again.
Right. Yeah. You're allowed some grace your first year or two. And
and again, I feel very fortunate that I have the luxury to make mistakes and to, in a casual manner, not beat myself up over it. Like I'm glad that like, the ability of our family to feed itself the first year wasn't contingent on me making boneheaded mistakes. Right.
Right.
And, part of why we encourage everybody to start just growing, whatever situation they're in is, it's better to make these mistakes now while, civilization, despite all its problems, is still functioning, right? You can still go to the supermarket and get food, et cetera. You still have access to relatively cheap energy, et cetera. I don't know if people are gonna have that luxury in the future. And so again, I feel very fortunate that we're still able to feed ourselves, even though we're making mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What would you say the best part of homesteading is?
Just being outside in nature so much and just interacting with nature, with ecology, with plants, with animals. It's just, in terms of like mental health, I think prior to this, there was, I did a lot of meditation. Part of it was just kind of like, I knew something was off in my psychology. And I think there was kind of a hole, or there was just some kind of existential lack that is no longer there. I feel much more just fulfilled on a day-to-day basis. And I attribute it to that.
Right.
Among other things, but I think that's the primary factor. And I this relates to kind of what a lot of us talk about in Doomer Optimism space is, there's a strand of environmentalism that wants to separate people out from this mythical, pristine nature, right? And like throw everybody in the city, and I don't know, grow food in vats or something. And we're bad for nature. We shouldn't be a part of it. And so we should be separate from it. I think that's just the exactly wrong, mindset, right? We evolved interacting with nature, right? We evolved kind of as horticulturalists, right? Of kind of, a lot of hunting and gathering, but also, interacting and changing ecosystems, systematically for our survival, right? Creating niche construction, right? And I just think that's how we've evolved for, hundreds of thousands of years and until very recently. And I just think it's a very integral part of our psychology. And when we don't have that, when we're separated from nature, I mean, don't get me wrong, like going for hikes in nature is great. That can definitely help. But actually being a participant in the process of nature, I think is what we really crave. I might, go so far as to say that that's kind of like the fundamental pathology in our society right now is just feeling unrooted, disconnected, from nature, but also from community, right? Last several decades has also, and structural economic changes has been very atomizing. Now with digital technology, virtual technology, hyper modernism, so to speak, it's just, that it's just accelerating that, by orders of magnitude probably. And I just think people are really psychologically damaged, and probably the only way to. Made for you. Thank you, Claire. This is all for us. Thank you. That's great. I think the core thing that we need to go back to. I'm hesitant to use this term "return," which is a popular meme. I don't think we can return, but I think we need to recover. I think we need to recover our connection to each other, to community, and to our ecology in the land. I think that's fundamentally that will fundamentally heal us.
Agreed. I mean, it's like, let's say anybody on any property, whether it be a suburban lot or wherever you are or wherever I am, even if it takes you your entire lifetime to make the whole property, let's say just 1% better, like you're gonna, eventually we're all gonna be dust. But if that 1%, maybe it compounds after you're gone, and eventually becomes 2% better the following generation, or hopefully someone will come in after us and continuously like make it better. Like, God willing, the earth will be here long after we are, and so if you can at least give it a little push in the right direction, nature will take over from there.
Right. I think for many of us who are kind of waking up to our predicament, I'm approaching middle age. I basically see my role at this point as laying a new foundation for my descendants and for my region, and also I'm doing podcasts, people all around the world. So I'm interested in the larger planetary context as well. But laying a foundation that others can build on, right? I feel like we've lost our foundation. And so if I can just kind of lay a foundation as flawed as it is, that can be the framework that, I would love if, I'm not one of these people who I'm not going to try and dominate my kids' preferences or anything, but I hope that they'll, I hope to, by raising them in this environment, that they'll want to continue this, this legacy. We'll see. So yeah, I definitely don't expect to be in a cottagecore or solar bunk paradise in my lifetime, but that's okay. I can get glimmerings.
Sure. Have you ever taken a PDC?
I haven't had the time, or just, the resources. I'd probably like to, although I don't feel like it's incredibly urgent, just because I feel like there's just so much information accessible online, books, things of that nature. I think I probably will eventually, maybe when the kids get a little bit older, and I have a little bit more time on my hands, then I'll consider it. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy to just kind of fumble my way and learn through experience, as well as insights from other sources as well. Yeah.
Whose PDC would you take? Let's say you had the time and availability, stuff like that. Whose PDC would you take?
Well, the first permaculture book I read was The Resilient Farm and Homestead by Ben Falk. So that kind of gave me a framework that I think was pretty foundational for me. So I'm tempted to say him, but that's tough. I really like Jack Spirko's approach to permaculture. He's on 3 Acres. He has the survival podcast.
I've listened to like over 1,000 of his episodes.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I mean, I don't listen to all of his episodes. I'm not interested in all of his episodes, but especially ones on permaculture, I think are really good. I just think he's very practical. Who else? I don't know. What's that guy? Geoff Lawton is his name. I mean, he seems to be pretty brilliant, just in the videos I've seen.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, right? A lot of it depends on what I'm trying to do, right? Like if I'm doing holistic raising, then I want somebody in like the Alan Savory tradition, right? Or if I want like, a kick-ass food forest, then I probably want to talk to, somebody like there's that book, The Holistic Orchard. I forget the guy's name, but that's a really good book. Right. And so a lot of it just depends on what area. And then there's people who are probably good at like kind of like integrating everything together. I think Ben Falk is one of those guys. Mark Shepard, he's kind of a badass. He wrote the book Restoration Agriculture, which is a really good book. I guess it depends. Richard Perkins is another badass. I mean, any of these people, would be great. These are all kind of like the big shots, the celebrities. But even somebody who's more local that's just kind of like been doing it for a couple of decades, I think that would be fine too, right? Like everybody has their own flavor. It's kind of an art and a science and a design science, and everybody kind of has their own flavor of and their own thing to add. So I'd probably want to consult with as many people as possible, I think.
That would be interesting to get like all of the little flavors. That you mentioned. Yeah, and a bunch of different. I mean, I'm assumingly like if it's a on-site PDC and not like an online PDC, it would be different climates too. I mean, obviously they'd go over the other climates, but you could see how they've done it.
Yeah.
And their climate. So.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of difference. Like, somebody who's suited to Costa Rica, for example, is going to be very different than the Northern Hemisphere.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever done consulting work to design someone's property in, let's say, a permaculture fashion?
I'm nowhere near ready for that or qualified. I'd want to be doing this on my own land for like at least 10 years.
Sure.
I'm willing to like give advice to friends, right? Like I would do it this way, or I read this somewhere that this is a better way to do it. But I'd want at least 10 years of experience under my belt.
Sure.
And I'd probably want to have taken like a, PDC or something before I would just feel like a fraud if I tried to do it now.
That's fair.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
I'm not ready for it yet. Somebody in their third year who's just basically been doing it on their own. Yeah. Not there yet.
Who would you consider a mentor in regenerative agriculture or permaculture?
A mentor in regenerative, like a personal mentor?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just a lot of people online on Twitter and kind of homestead Twitter that do really inspirational stuff, right? So there's a lot of people who do like holistic grazing, just on kind of rotational grazing, just on their own homesteads, right? So I have a friend, Josh Kearns, who lives about an hour from me, and he's just raising all kinds of animals, and I definitely, when I do start doing larger livestock, he's definitely probably going to be my major mentor for that. Right. And I don't know if he would consider himself an expert by any means, right? He's kind of just gotten started too, but he's a really smart guy, and his setup seems really good. I mean, there's people online, there's the account Dow Orion, who we interviewed on Doomer Optimism, and she's been doing, she has a background in like agroecology and permaculture, and she does consulting work, and she's had her own homestead going for, like 10 years at least, right? There's a lot of accounts. The account Happy Holistic Homestead, she like, it seems like
right.
doing just kicking ass and taking names. And so, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people online, I consider them, Josh Helling. He's just just a regular dude. He's a programmer, but he's been doing it for like 10 years and has a lot of cool stuff going on, as well as just kind of a lot of traditional, like old school farmers as well, like traditional farmers, right? Like just people who just have been doing it since they were as a child and just have a lot of common sense, right? And they might not even have heard of permaculture, but they just have a lot of common sense, and they know about maintaining soil fertility, and they know how to deal with animals, right? And so I also look to kind of traditional, people who have been doing traditional agriculture as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's what I don't. When I ask people if they want to come on the show and just talk about homesteading and stuff, I think they have like a lot of like imposter syndrome. Like,
yeah,
what do I know? I just grow food and have chickens. I was like, let's talk about it. Like, you don't need to be an expert in these things. Like,
yeah,
are you doing it? Yeah. Let's talk about it. Like,
well, let me ask you. So your family, you're doing this, hopping around the farm hop life. Yeah, I'm curious, like what you've observed by checking out different people's properties. Like what is what insight are you getting? And I'm sure you're learning a lot as well, like witnessing all these systems. Tell me about that.
So, to be completely fair, I do have imposter syndrome right now because we're taking off next year, and so to go visit other people's farms and properties. We have a baby due in like 6 weeks, and so
yeah. I was just coming in like 2 months, so
not far behind.
Yeah.
Not far behind. And so I'm like, I just want to seeing these people online, like you're talking about, that are super inspiring.
Yeah,
those are the people that I want to talk to and see what they're doing. Is like, like I mean, at least 50% of my interviews come from Twitter. People are posting this and that. It's like, wow, that sounds amazing. Yeah. And just like, you live like just people, like how they got there can be interesting. Like, how did you get started? Oh, right. That's how you got into it.
Yeah.
I just find that fascinating.
There's so many different paths into it, which is interesting. It's like an attractor point that brings people from many different walks of life. And I'm also really inspired by people who are like who what I would call are kind of world builders. And what I mean by that is like they've built community beyond their homestead, right? They've built kind of like this kind of functional interdependence. Either they've been there for multiple generations and they just have it, and I'm just have a lot of respect for those people that, sometimes they make fun of homesteading. It's like, oh, this is just kind of like this funny thing that, city folk like to pretend that they're doing, like to larp about. And it's kind of true, right? There's just people who've been, multiple generations on the land, but also people who've just kind of been developing, and showing, and you see it on Twitter, like developing community. So like one person, Lauren in the Wild, right? Like she was recently posting about, like this community event where she invited all these people over to their place, and having conversations about local sovereignty and autonomy and resilience, and community, and local food systems and local just local economies in general, and so that's I think that's really inspiring stuff by people who are doing that. Because ultimately, I don't think as a household level, I don't think like self-sufficiency, it might be possible. It might be possible for a very small sliver of people, but for most people, that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be community sufficiency, to a great degree, right? I don't think any of us are going to be completely closed off. Just the fact that we have to buy tools and we don't have local, local metal fabricators, and we're not mining our own metals, and so we're still part of this larger economy. But at a community level, that you're really supporting each other, and you're really developing a lot of, especially in the food system, food sovereignty, and really loving, tight knit communities. I think that's that's the most inspiring of being a homesteader, developing the land, but within that's radiating out and being fed and feeding this larger context. I think is really inspiring stuff.
You could get all your inspiration that you need from Lauren's account alone. I think she posted yesterday that when she got home from something, a neighbor had dropped off like buttered biscuits at her door, and someone wanted to trade like 100 garlic starts for some lumber because she has a sawmill now and stuff. Like that's the kind of community you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, that's I think that's the direction that we all need to move in again. And it's really inspiring to see people who are really doing that, right? Proof of concept, right? We need more proofs of concept. We need more positive examples, for not necessarily all the technical details, because that'll differ by context, but just to know that other ways of living are possible.
Absolutely. What would you tell people that want to get started?
Pace yourself. You can't learn everything overnight. A lot of it has to be experiential learning. You're not going to read a bunch of books and then have it all figured out. You need to get your hands dirty. You need to start working with tools, start working the soil, start planting things, start raising animals. I think probably starting with chickens, what we did is probably the easiest way to go, or some small, it could be geese or rabbits or something could work. Build your way up. And, depending on your situation, again, I think no matter what your situation is, whether you're in an apartment building in a city, whether you're in a suburb, there's always things you can do to start preparing yourself, to start making yourself, I would almost say, making yourself worthy to eventually have the opportunity to have more land, to get more access, right? So like if you're in an apartment, start, growing things in pots. This is what everyone says, but it's true. If you have a few square feet of land, create a little raised bed, et cetera, right? Just maximize everything that you can do. If you're in a very constrained situation, just be creative, maximize everything you can do in that situation, and prepare yourself to eventually have the opportunity to expand, like actually be bursting at the seams, right? Bursting at the seams, that then when the seams break and you have a much bigger space, you're ready to go. You're raring to go, right? You can jump in, running. Yep.
Yeah, build those skills with what you have right now. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So wrapping up here, do you want to tell people where they can find you, follow you, listen to more? What you have to say, the wisdom you just expel?
Cognizor on Twitter. That's the main thing. Do more Optimism. We have a Substack. We have a podcast. It's kind of a collective, so we have a lot of people who host. We try and interview a broad range of guests, both the kind of the experienced practitioners as well as more kind of theoretical discussions. Yeah, I mean that's the main thing. I think that's most of my social media presence.
Sweet. I'll have links for all of that in the show notes. So
great.
We're gonna just hang on one second. We're gonna wrap up and we'll close this down. But I still want to chat a little bit. So I appreciate your time, and everyone listening, I appreciate your time as well. And I hope you enjoyed our talk. So we'll talk to you later. Have a good evening.
Take care, Matt.
Great interview with Jason. He's super switched on. His high-level thinking's pretty contagious, and lots of great references to other material during our talk. Thanks everybody for watching. Please like, subscribe, and most importantly, share this video. Check out our website, farmhoplife.com. Sign up for our email list to be notified when new videos, interviews, and podcasts are available. On the website, you can learn more about us. Just go to the homepage, click About Us, and read about our mission and what we're trying to do. I'd really appreciate it. You can email me anytime, matt@farmhoplife.com. And I'm always looking for new people to interview. If you'd want to come on the show to talk about homesteading, farming, food security, homeschooling, just go to farmhoplife.com/guest. Also, you don't need to be an expert in anything. I'm just talking to normal people. Just happens that one of them was a doctor. So, no big deal. Go feed yourself.